Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 482. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. As you all expect, I have a lot of news on the Israel Hamas fighting going on right now, and so that's going to consume a lot of today's show. Also, a few updates on the situation in Ukraine. For anybody who's wanting, more frequent updates than I put out on this show about the situation, check out antiwar.com and the Libertarian Institute. Of course, the show does get posted at both of those sites, but I write news for both sites as well. And so if you want something more update, breaking news stories, typically myself or Dave DeCamp will have it written up at antiwar.com. And I also publish news stories over at the Institute. So with that, let's just get right into it today. The first article I have here, over 1,000 dead, Israeli Prime Minister says we are at war after Hamas attacks by land, air, and sea. This is the first article that I wrote up on it about probably 48 hours ago now, right Saturday morning, not long after Hamas launched the offensive. I started trying to kind of capture what was going on. And so on Saturday morning, fighters from Hamas invaded villages near Gaza. The group claims its fighters used paratrooper ships and cut through the fence that separates Gaza from the rest of Israel. Hamas claims to have captured several Israeli soldiers and villages. Now, this has been confirmed, and with the ongoing fighting, it's not exactly clear to me how many of these villages or settlements, little towns that are located near Gaza are still in the control of Hamas, but it does seem that the fighting is still going on in these regions. And so it's clear that the Israeli forces haven't completely cleared Hamas from these settlements and towns, which of course are made up of Israelis and not Palestinians. Now, there was also a rave happening not that far from the fence that separates Gaza from Israel. And at that rave, the Hamas fighters, at least some of them, showed up and were able to capture, apparently kill. So the total number of deaths at this rave is not yet clear, and so it could be that a lot of the people were captured and not so many were killed, or it could also be that a lot more bodies are yet to be totaled out from this rave. But the Hamas fire showed up and at least captured, it looks like, a few dozen, mainly women, at this rave, and then there are some other deaths that were caused by the Hamas fighters there. And then Hamas, in addition to conducting these operations, they also fired a lot of rockets. The numbers I saw range from 2,000 to 5,000 rockets were fired alone on Saturday morning. I don't know exactly how accurate those numbers are, who's really able to count them. And of course, I'm sure everything's kind of getting chalked up as a rocket, and there are the Palestinians, the Hamas fighters, are using drones and other types of munitions, not just rockets. Now, these rockets have hit Tel Aviv. We saw apartment buildings and cars on fire there, and other cities around Gaza. Now, not around Gaza, around southern Israel. Now that we're into Monday morning, I have seen reports that Hamas is using some longer range rockets, and they've actually been able to interfere with the main Israeli airport and cause it to close, at least temporarily, a couple times because of rocket fire in the area. And several international airlines have stopped conducting flights to Israel. So this Hamas operation has severely impacted Israeli society. Now, it's important to remember that human rights groups consider Gaza to be an open-air prison. Most Palestinians living in the region are refugees, so there's about 2 million people there living in 140 square miles. And again, I think about 80% of those people are not actually living, in their homes. That they were displaced from other areas of Israel and forced into Gaza. Israel severely restricts the amount of food, fuel, and water the people of Gaza can access. And so And there's very detailed reports, admissions from Israeli officials that the policy for Gaza is to keep the people there in a consistent state of crisis and near starvation, but not actually a full-blown humanitarian crisis, a full-blown starvation campaign. They don't want the Red Cross and all these groups coming in and saying, oh my God, children are dropping dead every single day. They just want to make sure that basically those kids just get enough to eat. They don't have jobs or anything else, and they live lives of absolute squalor and near starvation. And so for people saying, oh, why would Hamas do this? The reason is that the situation for the people of Gaza is absolutely desperate. Initially, the UN believed that the Gaza would not be habitable by the year 2020. And so we are a few years past that now, and the 2 million people living there are still struggling to get by. But, as there's not enough drinking water, food, fuel, energy to aid, for the people of Gaza to consume to live, has made life there increasingly difficult and worse. So let's see now. We have hours after the attack began, Netanyahu announced the start of Operation Iron Swords. He said, "We are at war, not an operation." Hamas has launched a murderous surprise attack against the state of Israel and its citizens. I order first all to cleanse the settlements of terrorists who had infiltrated, and ordered a large-scale mobilization of reserves. The enemy will pay a price he has never known. A spokesperson for the Israeli military said soldiers were being mobilized and strikes on Gaza had begun. The IDF, which is the Israeli Defense Forces, is flooding the area with troops. We are focusing on the fighting on the Gaza border. We have begun widespread call-ups in all parts of the IDF. The Air Force is also striking Gaza. Now, initially, about a couple dozen strikes that Israel carried out, including on apartment buildings in Gaza. And we have the Israeli Minister of National Security, this is Ben-Gvir, stating that there was a state of emergency. Now, Ben-Gvir is a very important part of all of this because he is violently anti-Palestinian, and if all the Palestinians were gone tomorrow, I think he would be a very happy man. Is to try to put a very simple explanation on his policy. I guess he would probably prefer that he doesn't have to go through and personally execute every, man, woman, and child in Palestine. However, he does want those people gone, and for Tel Aviv, Israel, to control all of what was Palestine. So let's see, the violence has spread around Israel, while not as significant. There's hundreds of deaths now of Israelis who have been killed. It's not clear exactly from everything I've seen what the breakdown is as far as Israeli civilians versus Israeli soldiers who were killed in the raid or the attacks by Hamas. And also, I guess there have been some people there who were, I don't know about tourists, but maybe they're visiting family or whatever, and were also killed. And so this, the 700 plus dead Israelis, my guess is that is a total of soldiers, civilians, and people who are from foreign countries but were in Israel. So now let's get into a little bit of, what the initial U.S. reaction was, and then we'll, of course, get into what developed on Sunday. But this was the initial U.S. reaction on Saturday. President Joe Biden had a phone conversation with Netanyahu shortly after the Israeli leader declared his country was fighting a war. The American president pledged U.S. support for Israel's self-defense. Fighting started with Hamas offensive in southern Israel and has led to, I believe the numbers are now over 700 Israeli dead and nearly, if not 500 Palestinian deaths. Although, Israel is still in the middle of its campaign. Hamas is still launching rockets. So, there could be more people to die in the future and the death toll to go up from that. I also expect, particularly in Gaza, that a lot of the people are buried beneath rubble, where, versus what Hamas did where they just shot people. Those bodies are just laying there. When bodies are under rubble, it takes time to recover those bodies. And so I would guess the Palestinian death toll is already quite a bit higher than it's reported, where the Israelis may have a fairly decent count of their dead up until this point. Although the Hamas also took a lot of captives. This is something really important to note, that at least a couple dozen of them are reported to be soldiers. There's some video suggesting that a couple dozen are women. Hamas said they have multiple times, multiple dozen. So, assume 24, 36, and then multiply that by 3, 4, 5, maybe. I don't know. So I imagine that Hamas has a few hundred, probably, Israeli hostages. There's reports that either Americans were killed or that there are American hostages here. So, a lot of details that have come out, a lot of details that are still in question, and things really left to be found out about what has already happened. Another important thing I should note that I wrote in this article is that Hamas named its operation and said that it launched the movement because of the treatment of Palestinians at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is, of course, the third most holy site in Islam, located in Jerusalem. And since Netanyahu has returned to power in Israel, there has been more pressure and more maltreatment of Palestinians from accessing that very important historic is religious site in Islam. And on Thursday, 800 Israelis stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, while Tel Aviv security forces prevented Palestinians under the age of 60 from accessing the site. And so, these kinds of things are happening all the time. And one of the, main things that the leaders of Hamas are stressing is that this operation was, at least in part, meant to help to secure, or I'm not sure, what the long-term plan is here, but they want to, I guess, make it clear that they are very upset with what's happening at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. And again, with people like Ben-Gvir within the Israeli government, it would not be a surprise if Israel did something pretty radical directed at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So we have Biden saying to Netanyahu, I guess this was probably on the phone call, he said, "I made it clear to Prime Minister Netanyahu, we stand ready to offer all appropriate means of support to the government and the people of Israel. Terrorism is never justified, and Israel has a right to defend itself and its people." So I'm going to go ahead and talk about this self-defense thing here, because it's really, really stupid. So Israel, if you look at a map of Israel since, the 1940s, compared to 2023, it's very obvious that Israel was once Palestine and has essentially, Palestine has essentially been consumed, and the remaining 7 or so million Palestinians have been forced onto a smaller and smaller piece of the territory, with less, connectivity to each other, less access to the outside world, more general restrictions, and a more repressive occupying military force, or in the West Bank. And then when it comes to Gaza, that is essentially an open air prison. And so the people living there are just often not allowed to leave. It's so horrific. Even children, even Palestinian children living in Gaza, say they have a really severe form of cancer that they can't treat in Gaza. And those parents secure treatment, say, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, or abroad. Maybe they are able to get like some kind of program so they could go to Turkey or Egypt or Jordan and try to receive treatment for their very serious disease there. And oftentimes the Israeli government will deny any adult traveling with the children. And so it makes it almost impossible for the children to travel to get their cancer treatment. But if they are able to travel, it's almost always with an adult that's not related to them. And so, imagine you're a little 10-year-old who's about to go through multiple rounds of radiation and chemotherapy, and the government decides that, not only can not your mom, not your dad, not your grandma, not your grandpa, not your cousin, not your older sister, not your aunt, uncle, or anybody that you have even met in your life, your parents eventually get lucky, they find someone to apply, and they, basically a full-on stranger, you're put in their hands and sent abroad or to some place you've never been before to receive cancer treatment. I mean, that's just the level of cruelty that Israel inflicts on the Palestinians on a day-to-day basis, and particularly in Gaza. Also, if you look at just any other kind of protest or anything the people of Gaza have done, not only to try to draw attention, but to ask for some kind of fairness and some kind of ability to live a life where you're not crammed into this extremely small territory and told by the government of Israel that they limit the number of food the people of Gaza get every day to keep them on a near starvation diet. And so in 2018, I believe, was the Great March of Return protest, where thousands of Palestinians, completely just regular civilians, regular protests, marching up to the fence with Israel, and hundreds of them were killed, including children, including paraplegics, including clearly identified journalists and medics were intentionally shot by Israeli snipers and murdered, and hundreds of others were, became amputees because Israel shot out their legs using bullets that are meant to, sever limbs. So this is the kind of cruelty that the people of Gaza face when they try any kind of peaceful measure to protest their oppression. And so, again, when people say, oh, Israel has a right to self-defense, you really don't get to throw 2 million people in a prison for no reason, and then when they try to leave, shoot them and claim self-defense. And then when they finally, mount an attack against you, look, killing civilians is always awful. And I'm not a fan of Hamas. I wish, there was a far more morally upstanding force in Gaza that would say, not shoot people at the rave outside of the Gaza prison, who would at least, the indiscriminate rocket attacks, I kind of understand that there's not a whole lot Hamas could do. They don't have F-16s, and so there shouldn't be, this crazy standard that Hamas can't hit a civilian building when Israel is on every 3 or 4 months they're destroying an apartment building in Gaza City. And so why should the Palestinians have to, live up to a standard that the Israelis don't? But, there definitely were attacks on civilians as a part of the Hamas raid. That is absolutely awful. That all being said, Israel does not have a right to self-defense. This is just stupid. Israel has colonized and stolen territory from the Palestinians. So if anybody here has any kind of right to self-defense, it's the Palestinians in Gaza. All right, so let's move on, talk a little bit about what Netanyahu said later in the day on Saturday. He said, our first objective is to clear out the hostile forces that infiltrated our territory and restore the security and quiet to the communities that have been attacked. The second objective, at the same time, is to exact an immense price from the enemy within the Gaza Strip. The third objective is to reinforce other fronts that nobody should mistakenly join this war. Now, I also understand that Netanyahu said something during his address that was "get out now." And initially this was interpreted as Netanyahu telling civilians in Gaza to get out now, which I don't think is true for a couple of reasons. One, the Israeli government wants the 2 million people in Gaza locked in Gaza. It's a prison. They're not meant to leave. And so I don't think he was saying that. And if he was saying go right out in the Egyptian Sinai, not come into Israel and and we'll take the civilians and do the right thing. He was saying to the Israelis who live in settlements around Gaza to get out now because of the massive Israeli military invasion and intervention that is coming now too. I think it's pretty clear, and this is something that we see a lot from Israel, that Netanyahu really in Israel really aren't intending to say target Gaza. They're going to exact a punishment against the Palestinian people overall, and so this is just very disgusting. Now, let's see. Is there anything else in this article I want to mention to you guys? We should also mention that the Israeli government shut off, this was an announcement from the Minister of Energy and Infrastructure, all electricity going to the Gaza Strip. And of course, they really don't have an ability to generate very much electricity within the Strip. And so this means that hospitals are starting to run out of power, and all patients there could, start dropping dead pretty soon. All right. This was written up by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. U.S. officials expect Israel to launch ground invasion of Gaza. And so this was written on Sunday. This is, a little bit more of an update to what I had written before. U.S. officials said Sunday that they expect Israel to launch a ground invasion of Gaza within the next 24 to 48 hours after the government and Netanyahu formally declared it was at war with Hamas. A spokesperson for the Israeli military said in a video posted to X that Israel has sent 100,000 reservist troops amassed in southern Israel near Gaza. We have amassed around 100,000 reserve troops who are currently in southern Israel preparing to execute the task the Israeli government has designated the IDF to do, the spokesperson said, adding, "Our job is to make sure that at the end of this war, Hamas will no longer have any military capability to threaten Israeli civilians. In addition to that, we are going to make sure that Hamas will not only not be able to govern the Gaza Strip." And now, let's see. Hamas won the election in Gaza, I want to say in 2006, so a very long time ago. And of course, you could read articles and publish in mainstream U.S. outlets on how the Israeli government is really responsible for the rise of Hamas in Gaza, and how they, went not only to facilitate that, but really thought that Hamas would present a counter to Fatah. And so, they want to balance their enemies against each other here, and created a larger enemy that way in Hamas. So over 1,000 people have been killed in 2 days of violence since Hamas launched an unprecedented attack on southern Israel from Gaza on Saturday, which included a ground assault and rocket fire. Israel responded by cutting off power, fuel, and all imports to Gaza, which has been under blockade since 2007, and launched major air strikes on the besieged enclave. Fighting in southern Israel was still ongoing as of Sunday afternoon, and on Monday morning when I woke up, I just did a little check and of the news stories and went over. It does seem like that fighting is still going on. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad claim they have taken 130 people captive from Israel into Gaza, including some Israeli soldiers. So that number is slightly lower than I thought. I thought it was going to be between 200 and 300. So we will see if that number tits up anymore. They want Israel to release thousands of Palestinian prisoners in exchange for the Israelis. Hamas gunned down Israeli civilians in its attack, including at a music festival near Gaza. Israeli strikes on Gaza have also killed civilians, including dozens of women and children. One man told the Associated Press that 19 members of his family were wiped out in a strike on his house. "This is a safe house with women and children," he said. Because Gaza is under blockade, the residents have nowhere to flee to, and major Israeli ground assault on the enclave will occur massive civilian casualties. Over 2 million people live in Gaza, one of the most densely populated places on earth. The U.S. is strongly backing Israel as it is preparing to invade Gaza. President Biden told Netanyahu that military aid is on the way, and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin announced the deployment of an aircraft carrier strike group to the region. The Washington Post reported that Israel has requested heightened cooperation with the U.S. on military intelligence sharing related to southern Lebanon. Early on Sunday, Israel struck Lebanon after Hezbollah launched rockets at Israeli military posts in the disputed Sheba Farms area, signaling the possibility of a two-front war. Now, my guess is that in the north between Hezbollah and Israel, it's more just a little flirting going on between the two now towards war than actually looking to engage in a conflict. I think Hezbollah is waiting to see how intense the Israeli response in Gaza is. If Israel is looking to flatten or wipe out the Palestinians there, you may see a response from Hezbollah. I'm not sure what Israel would do in that case. I guess it's very intense airstrikes against Lebanon, but that is not for sure. All right, Biden tells Netanyahu more military aid is on the way. So the U.S. already gives Israel $3.8 billion in military aid each year, which is appalling enough as Israel is an apartheid state. This has been concluded by major international human rights organizations who, are like Human Rights Watch. This is not a group that is speaking out for any reason other than they see a situation in Israel that is so appalling, they have to call it what it is. Israel is a country that, again, tons of people living within the bounds of what Israel claims are its borders are Palestinians that have nearly no rights. They can't vote. The 5 million Israelis living particularly in the West Bank have no system of justice. They're subjected to Israeli military courts. Just the most horrific situations where Israeli soldiers will come into a Palestinian home in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., take a 7, 8, 9-year-old kid out of his bed, say, "We saw you earlier in the day throwing rocks." Leave him, probably leave him in the cold, take his clothes, make him really uncomfortable for several hours, and then put him in the room with a bunch of armed Israelis and maybe one lawyer, not his lawyer, just a lawyer, put a document in front of his face in a language that he doesn't read and say, sign that document, and then say that document is a confession and then sentence him to multiple years in jail. I mean, this happens in the West Bank all the time. This is what the U.S. is supporting when we support Israel. We are supporting apartheid, no different than South Africa. So, Biden pledged more aid. According to the White House, President Biden conveyed that additional assistance for the Israeli Defense Forces is now on its way to Israel, with more to follow in the coming days. Unclear to me what this is. I mean, Israel does have a pretty modern and pretty capable military, and so you wouldn't think that Israel would need all that much support unless it's maybe something very specific that they have shortages of. And so Iron Dome would be my guess, is really what they're looking for. This is their air defense system that they use for smaller, lower flying projectiles. Although, the rounds for the Iron Dome are very expensive. The drones and the rockets that Hamas uses aren't. And so I'm not sure how, if this fight goes on for a long time, I'm not sure the U.S. could supply Tel Aviv with all the air defenses it really needs, especially as it has depleted a lot of its air defense reserves arming Ukraine. And then it's also worth knowing that Zelensky has expressed a lot of support for Netanyahu, although I think that's just for him to try to get more support with the West. All right, so we have here U.S. deploys aircraft carrier strike group to support Israel. I struggle to think that in a conflict between Israel and Palestinians that the U.S. would directly intervene with airstrikes or missile strikes or something like that. That being said, moving an aircraft carrier strike group into the region gives the U.S. plenty of ability to do so. I have heard reports that a part of this is more about Hezbollah entering the fight, and this is basically a threat to Lebanon that if, Hezbollah gets in the fight, then the U.S. would go to war with Israel's northern, their neighbor to the north, on behalf of Tel Aviv. So this was really interesting. Dave wrote this up at antiwar.com. An Israeli lawmaker told Al Jazeera on Saturday that his party had been warning that Israelis' policies towards Palestinians would erupt into violence that Israel is experiencing in the wake of the Hamas assault. And so, in the U.S. you hear, oh, what a horrible, unprovoked attack by Hamas, and how could anything like this happen? Why would anything like this happen? When you have a member of the Israeli Knesset openly saying that, he says, we condemn and oppose any assault on innocent civilians, but in contrast to the Israeli government, that means we are opposed to any assault on Palestinian civilians as well, and we must analyze those terrible incidents, the attacks, in the right context, and that is the ongoing occupation. And so, we have members of the Israeli Knesset saying that this isn't unprovoked, this isn't Israeli self-defense, this is a reaction to occupation, a reaction to apartheid and the cruel system that Israel imposes on millions of Palestinians. So not at all, or I guess it's very surprising that we have somebody, saying this, but it's also obviously true. So last up here, when it comes to Israel today, Representative McCall says a House Speaker is needed to replenish Israel's Iron Dome. And so it seems like, hey, we're going to work on all of our differences because the Republicans who are trending towards being like non-interventionist, they really don't want to be involved in Ukraine. And so they're fighting very hard against the White House, against funding for Kiev. However, now that Tel Aviv is also asking for funds, I think they're going to get essentially all the Republicans back on board with the war state. And so if, we need to elect a new speaker to send an additional $1 billion in funding to Tel Aviv for its Iron Dome, then we will do that, even if it means electing a speaker that will also pass billions of dollars in spending for Ukraine. Speaking of funding for Ukraine, we have this one here. Report: Biden considering huge $100 billion Ukraine spending package. President Biden is considering asking Congress for a massive $100 billion spending package for the Ukraine war. The idea of the huge spending package would be to fund the proxy war through the 2024 election without having to worry about the growing opposition to the policy in Congress. The majority of the House and the Senate currently still support arming Ukraine. The big package idea is firmly supported by many throughout the administration. Supporters of Ukraine want this to be a one and done big bill and then not have to deal with it until after the next election. Defense News recently reported that multiple senators have also proposed passing a massive Ukraine aid package to get through the whole year. Senator Lindsey Graham put the price tag at $70 billion. And so Biden's package seems like it would be well past the 2024 election. Very concerning. Now, things are not all going well for Ukraine, even as Biden is floating a $100 billion package. We have Slovakia suspending military support for Ukraine. Slovakia's outgoing government has halted security assistance for Ukraine. The Slovak Social Democracy Party won last week's election on a platform of ending military aid to Kiev. On Friday, a Slovakian government spokesperson announced the caretaker government would halt shipping weapons to Ukraine. On Monday, this was a week ago Monday, Robert Fico, the leader of the Slovak Social Democracy Party, was given the responsibility of forming a new government after his party won a plurality in the October 1st election. He has until October 16th to garner enough support in Parliament, which is a majority, to form the new government. Until that time, the caretaker government will implement the promised end of arms transfers to Kiev. So, that was interesting, because you could almost imagine here, if this was in a different country, like let's say, Trump wins, or a Republican wins the upcoming election, Biden has 3 months left in office, rather than honoring Trump or Vivek or somebody who don't say no more, we're not sending any more weapons to Ukraine, rather than honoring that, my guess is that Biden would do the opposite and ship as many weapons to Kiev as he can in those 3 months, in order to, stymie his predecessor's policy. So Fico's party holds 42 seats out of the nation's 150-seat parliament, and he is expected to partner with a leftist party and a nationalist Slovak National Party to form a majority in the legislature. And of course, Slovakia joins Poland and Hungary, all three countries bordering Ukraine, in denying aid to Kiev. All right, here. So the European Union says it can't support Ukraine without the U.S. We all know this, but it's important when we get admissions like this from high-ranking European officials to highlight this. So this came from Joseph Borrell. He said Europe cannot fill the gaps of the U.S. And, what this means is that we have a lot of power here in Washington to end a really important and really deadly war. And, the more power that we could pressure we could put on our congressmen, especially right now, seems to be important, especially as a growing number of Americans are opposed to sending more aid arms to Ukraine. So a new poll conducted by Reuters shows only 41% of Americans believe Washington should continue to send arms to Kiev. The White House is pushing Congress to pass a $24 billion aid package for Ukraine. However, the assistance package is being held up as the House seats a new speaker, causing some in Kiev to panic. The 2-day Reuters poll found 41% of Americans supporting sending more arms to Ukraine, while 35% opposed further military assistance. When the same survey was conducted in May, 46% of Americans backed spending arms, while 29% were opposed. And so that's a pretty good, we made some real progress in this poll over the past couple of months. A recent Chicago Council on Global Affairs poll found the country is divided on whether aid to Ukraine has been worth it. 53% respond that the billion sent to Ukraine was worth the cost, while 45% say it has not been worth the cost. The same survey found 63% of Americans favor sending more weapons to Ukraine, although Republican support slipped to 50%. The best looking poll that I've seen is from August in CNN, when that outlet asked Americans if they approved of sending more aid to Ukraine. A majority of people who responded, 55% of all Americans and 71% of Republicans, said they did not want Congress to pass another massive assistance package for Ukraine. The debate over the budget and the House Speaker seeking a the House seeking a new speaker has delayed a vote that President Biden is hoping for on $24 billion of assistance for Ukraine, including $17 billion worth of weapons. A group of Republicans in the legislature have pledged to vote against any bills that include more aid to Ukraine. The struggle to pass another assistance has caused anxiety in the White House and Kiev. A member of the Ukrainian parliament said, "We are freaking out. For us, this is a disaster." So last up here to just mention, I wrote this article for antiwar.com at the end of last week. A desperate White House is scrambling to find money for arming Ukraine. And it appears, and I tried to break down everything going on, because it is kind of complicated, right? How all this funding and shipment of weapons have gone to Ukraine. My understanding is there's basically 3 pockets of aid money that the U.S. has to facilitate weapons shipments to Ukraine. The first and the main one is the Presidential Drawdown Authority. This is sending weapons directly from U.S. stockpiles to Ukraine. And I understand it as Congress passes money for the White House to ship weapons through the PDA, but that money is for replacing the weapons. And so let's say we send Ukraine 1,000 javelins, then the money that Congress approved would be going towards buying another 1,000 javelins to replenish the American stockpiles. Now, the Pentagon, I think, did a pretty nefarious accounting trick over the summer, and they said that, oh, no, that pocket of money that Congress gives us is for the amount of arms that we could send to Ukraine. And so let's say that 1,000 new javelins, I'm just throwing numbers around here. I have no idea how much they cost off the top of my head. Let's say 1,000 new javelins would cost $200 million. But let's say, just like anything used, you have 1,000 javelins down there. Some of them have been fired. Some of them have been sitting around. Some of them are 10 years old. And the Pentagon looks at that and says, it costs us $200 million to replace these. But if I were just selling them, I'd probably, let them go for $150 million, right? And so then they say that's the number that they should be using. And so that's how they found this $6.2 billion accounting error to free up PDA funds. However, this has, I believe, created a little bit of a problem for the Pentagon, because they say they have over $5 billion left in the PDA to ship weapons to Ukraine. However, I don't think they have that full $5 billion worth to replenish the American stockpiles. And in fact, I think that number is closer to $1 billion. And so, again, that's just a little bit of what's going on here. We also had the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, and this is money that is given from Congress to the Pentagon, and then the Pentagon could go to Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, whoever they want, and they could say, hey, we want Abrams tanks, Stinger missiles, Patriot missiles, whatever. Let's say they agree, we're going to buy $1 billion of Patriot missiles for Ukraine. Well, maybe Raytheon and the companies have those sitting around and they could take them and ship them to Ukraine. More likely they need to produce these weapons. And so it's unclear as far as, when the Pentagon says we're purchasing, again, Patriot systems for Ukraine under the USAI, when those weapons will actually reach Ukraine. It could be months from now. It could be years from now. And I believe that's probably about the second biggest pocket of funds. And then the smallest, I think it's about $4.6 billion in total, is the Foreign Military Financing Program. And this is a State Department account. And Congress has put $4.6 billion in the State Department account. And how it typically works is that the State Department will give Ukraine a grant, and Ukraine will use that grant to buy American weapons. And so let's say Ukraine decides they need 100 HIMARS. So they're going to go to the U.S. government, and they're going to say, we want to buy 100 HIMARS. They're going to work out the details of that deal. And then the White House will give Ukraine, or the State Department will give Ukraine a grant for those funds, and then Ukraine will use those funds to buy that weapons platform. So there's currently $650 million left in this account. The USAI funds have been completely depleted. And it's my understanding, and it kind of sounds like to me from a Politico report that just came out, speaking with two unnamed American officials, the plan is to use that $650 million not necessarily as you would typically use an FMF program, which would be, Taiwan uses it all the time and they get the weapons years later, that they would use this $650 million to maybe buy weapons directly from the White House, from American stockpiles, or just to facilitate weapons transfers that are going to happen immediately. And so apparently the two options that the White House is considering, should Congress decide not to pass another aid package for Ukraine, one would be to do this and use this $650 million to cover, I guess, a short-term thing. And longer term, they're looking at reprogramming some Pentagon funds. And reprogramming means, they say, we were planning to build a third destroyer this year, but we really don't need that, and so now we could take this $350 million and instead ship weapons to Ukraine or something like that, although that should require congressional approval. Now, you know, America in 2023 has moved well past our Constitution. And so if the Biden administration just started doing things that they really don't have the authority to do, like coming up with $6 billion accounting errors, then I don't think Congress is going to do very much to stop it. At the same time, some of these restrictions do really get in the way and interfere with what the government does. And so maybe we will have a real debate on reprogramming some congressional funds once a new Speaker of the House is elected and they move back to debating the budget. But I kind of guess at this point, especially with what's going on in Israel, that there will be some in Congress who will have one or two ideas, either to tie the security assistance to Israel, to Ukraine, and then to say, do you support America's most crucial ally? Because if you don't, then that's really bad, and the Israeli lobby will attack you, and what a bad Republican not being willing to support Tel Aviv. I think the other option will be is that they'll say we need to wrap it all into a continuing resolution, fund the government for a year, fund Israel, and fund Ukraine. Either way, probably gonna be bad. Anyways, I'll be back on Wednesday to break down the rest of the bad news we get. Thanks, everybody.